Hello everyone. Okay, so for this section and the following ones, I will be doing a lot of hands-on implementation because I don't think going over these topics with a PowerPoint is going to be beneficial to anyone, and it's not going to help you understand the material the way hands-on practice will. So I will be working out of my Trailhead playground for the next couple sections and videos. I really encourage y'all to do the same. And the more hands-on experience that you can get, really the better positioned you are for success, not only on this certification, but also the expectations of you once you become a platform developer certified professional. So if you've never done this before, in Salesforce, from a sandbox, the primary way that you can write Apex code is by coming over to the gear icon, scrolling past setup, and clicking the developer console link, and that will open up a new tab for you. At least it does in Chrome. And when it does, you get redirected to the developer console. Now, I will note there are other ways that you can write code in Salesforce. One of the more up-and-coming ways that I'm seeing is becoming really popular in the Salesforce world is using Visual Studio Code in conjunction with the SFDX CLI extension. So if you do have time and are curious about a better IDE or integrated development environment to be writing your Apex code, please check out VS Code and the documentation that Salesforce has around that. I do think it's a much superior way to be writing your code versus the developer console, but for ease of use and just getting to the point, I will be using developer console for these sessions. So talking about a couple things that we have at our advantage here in the developer console is that we can create files directly from the file section of the toolbar. So we can create classes, triggers, visual force pages, lightning components, whether they're Aura or Lightning Web components. We can open up those Aura or Lightning Web components. We can open up classes and triggers from here. We can download logs, open up logs, save files, close all files. Under Edit, we have our Find and Replace All capability, fixing indentation. We have this anonymous window that I'll talk about in a little bit. A perspective manager. We can change our log levels, clear out different checkpoints or log panels, and switch workspaces. So there's no point really right now in going over all of these, but as we go through some of these videos, I'll use the different sections of this toolbar, and it'll make a lot more sense then. But just to point out some of the tabs down here, we have the logs, so every time you execute a piece of code, whether directly from the developer console or even in here when I click between and through different tabs. So for example, if I open up an opportunity tab here, I should see that the log is capturing the actions I'm taking on the UI. So that's that. Tests, which we'll talk about soon in some of the later videos. This is where you can see all the test classes that you run, and you can see some of my previous code coverage here. Not doing too well on some of these. Checkpoints we'll talk about later, but it's basically a way that you can pause your code and get a better understanding of the different values you had when that piece of code ran. Query editor, so what we can use this to plan out our SOQL and SOSL queries. There's also view state, progress, and problems, which this will become your new favorite tab real soon. So instead of right now, I don't want to deal with creating class, trigger, any of that. I want to really just get to the point. And that's a great use case for this anonymous window. Salesforce gives us the anonymous window as a way to really quickly try out different pieces of code without necessarily worrying about setting up the infrastructure to call that code. So what we can do directly in the anonymous window, it's a tongue twister, is write out some really simple code. So for this one, we're going to be writing our very first program right here, and that will be a system.debug line, which prints out to the Salesforce logs, what we saw here, our own custom message. And we can do that by writing out and calling system dot. And as soon as you put dot, it exposes all the different methods available under that system class. What we want for this one is the debug method. And as soon as you type that in, it auto-populates those quotes for you. So in Salesforce, this is called a string literal. And in a string literal, we can type in a collection of characters or sentences, and that's called a string literal. So for this, I will just write out my very first program. And I want to make sure this checkbox is checked because as soon as I execute this piece of code, I want it to automatically open up the logs for me. And you have the option between either highlighting the code and executing it or executing all pieces of code. Simple enough. We'll hit execute. So what happened just now when it said sending the request to Salesforce is that it saved our code, it compiled our code, saved it to the server after it compiled it, and then it ran our code all in one big step. And we can see that the logs opened up just like we asked it to, and we can see some information we don't necessarily know a lot about or care about. You can see that I'm the user that's logged in, the time zone that I'm in, and some of these governor limits will become more clear as we go through the course. But hidden in there, we can see our debug statement, my very first program. So if I only cared about debug statements, Salesforce gives us this checkbox that we can check that gets rid of all the other junk we don't need and only shows us our debug. So just like that, we were able to write our very first